9 years. That's how long I've watched Mary's revolving door of admirers come and go. She thrives on it, the way these young men fall at her feet, completely under her spell. I've always played the understanding husband, looking the other way while she lives this double life. All those years, I stayed quiet, focusing on building my career and finding my confidence. The night I finally decided to leave, everything changed. I was about to turn in when the doorbell rang. There stood Mary, drunk as usual, practically falling into my arms. Behind her was another one of her conquests, young, handsome Jack with that youthful energy she couldn't resist. Another puppy following her home. Jack flashed me a smile. "Brother George, Mary had too much to drink. I brought her back to you." I simply pushed Mary back toward him. "Bottom drawer of the wardrobe has fresh pajamas if you need them," I said casually. "Just keep it down. I'm a light sleeper." The look on Jack's face was priceless. He clearly wasn't expecting me to be so calm about my wife's affair. "Good George, I'm not staying over," he stammered, eyes wide as he carefully helped Mary to the sofa. Every movement screamed affection. With a shy smile, he said, "George, thank you for taking care of Mary." The way he emphasized "thank you" was his amateur attempt at marking his territory. I almost laughed. "When it comes to taking care of people," I replied, "our family's nanny is more professional." His face fell instantly. I didn't bother saying anything else and headed to the kitchen after showing him out. "He's just a kid." Mary's voice, suddenly clear and sober, came from behind me. She wrapped her arms around my waist. "Don't take it personally. He's no threat to your position." I dumped out my unfinished tea without a word. Mary loved throwing that word, position, in my face, like I should be grateful just to be her husband. Truth is, I only held on to that title because it was convenient, not because I loved her. It opened doors for me. That's all. Morning came, and Mary appeared at the breakfast table still reeking of last night's drinks. She leaned toward me with an announcement that caught me off guard. "Jack just graduated. I'm making him my assistant." This was different. In our years together, Mary's men never lasted longer than a season, 3 months tops. She always chased the thrill of someone new, careful to avoid any real attachments. But now she wanted to keep Jack around? She must actually have feelings for this boy. I kept my eyes on my plate. "Do you need me to set anything up for him?" "How generous of you," she said with arched eyebrows and that half smile I knew too well. "What if he wants your place as my family's son-in-law?" Without emotion, I replied, "If that's what you want, it's fine." "George, cut it out," Mary said lazily, her eyes half closed. "I'm not in the mood to play these games." When I didn't respond, she sat up straight, suddenly alert. "Wait, are you serious?" I looked at her, genuinely confused. "Haven't you always wanted me to be sensible and do as you say? If he wants my position, wouldn't it be good if I just handed it over?" The nourishing soup I'd just given Mary crashed to the floor as she exploded. "George, have you lost your mind?" Porcelain fragments and liquid splattered everywhere. I paused, looking from the mess to her face. "Is something bothering you?" In one swift move, she grabbed my chin, forcing me to look up at her. "Jack will not affect your position," she said slowly, deliberately. "Stop this tantrum, George. Just keep your place as my family's son-in-law." With that, she slammed the door on her way out, probably off to find Jack. Shortly after, a text message. "George, come apologize once you've thought about what you did." I stared at the broken porcelain on the floor, my mind drifting back to high school graduation. Mary had blushed then, shyly moving closer to me for our photo, just so our shoulders might touch. I remember feeling the heat of her affection like a flame. The summer breeze was warm, but standing next to her made my heart warmer still. Those early days, I can still see the light dancing in Mary's eyes when I said yes to being with her. "I'll be the best girlfriend ever," she promised. "I'll treat you well forever." Surrounded by such genuine passion, how could I not believe her? I never imagined true feelings could change so dramatically. College came, and I buried myself in studies while launching my first business venture. Time was scarce, but I made every moment with Mary count, planning surprises, giving her all the care I could manage. It wasn't enough. Mary wanted more of me, wanted adventures and outings I couldn't provide. I had no family money to fall back on. Everything depended on my own sweat. 10 years of grinding, I couldn't afford to ease up for a second. The arguments started, growing more frequent as time passed. Then came the blow. My store, the one I'd poured everything into, was forced to close after competitors played dirty. The day we went to handle the closing paperwork, Mary was practically bouncing with excitement. "Didn't I tell you not to waste your time on this?" she kept saying. "Wouldn't it be easier to just be my family's son-in-law after graduation?" What she wanted was a puppet, someone without a backbone who'd follow her every command, like those fairy tale princes who lived off their princess's wealth. "I have nothing to reflect on," I texted back to Mary now. She must have been clutching her phone, waiting, because her response came instantly. "George, you'll come begging to me soon enough." Our wedding anniversary was approaching at month's end. We'd planned a dinner celebration, though in reality, this wasn't just about us. The dinner was critical for Mary's family company. Traditional businesses like theirs had been hit hard by the internet boom, and the last 2 years had been especially rough due to their lack of innovation. I'd been pushing my team around the clock to develop a new product, one we planned to unveil at this anniversary dinner to attract much-needed investment. This could be the lifeline the company needed. At such a crucial moment, there was zero room for error, not from the company side, not from potential investors. I'd repeatedly stressed to Mary how important it was that she be there. This wasn't just about showcasing a new product. The company needed to project an image of family stability to their partners, a united front to keep stock prices steady and prevent any scandals that might damage the business. But Mary treated it like any other corporate event, something that could be rescheduled on a whim. So when Jack pulled his sick act and begged for her company, she didn't hesitate to choose him. I knew what she was really doing, teaching me a lesson, punishing me for our earlier disagreement. I sat at the dinner table, staring blankly at my phone's missed call log, while our business partner grew visibly irritated beside me. Around us, guests exchanged knowing glances. Then my phone buzzed with a text. "Brother George, Mary is with me." Almost immediately after, a photo flashed onto the banquet hall's massive screen. Mary and Jack in an intimate embrace. Her head rested on his shoulder, lipstick smudged, cheeks flushed with color. That single image destroyed everything we'd worked for. The carefully constructed illusion of harmony crumbled instantly. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. No investor would risk their money on a company teetering on the edge of a family scandal. The murmurs grew louder until they became a deafening roar in my head. The bright overhead lights burned my eyes. Glasses clinked, laughter mixed with mockery, surrounding me from all sides. I felt trapped in some bizarre dream state, unable to separate reality from nightmare. Hours passed. Guests finally left in the early morning hours. Rain began pouring outside when Mary finally arrived at the hotel. The banquet had long since ended. She found me sitting alone, expressionless in the aftermath. "George," she called softly. I lifted my head slowly, meeting her gaze with empty eyes. "Are you satisfied now? Everything's ruined. The entire team's work, wasted. Mary, was this lesson worth it?" The color drained from her face. Her voice quivered. "George, I didn't know this dinner was so important. Why did you upset me that day? I just wanted you to admit you were wrong." Her voice faded into silence. I stared at the wine glass by my feet, watching how the remaining red liquid caught the flickering lights from above, making my head spin even more. "Mary, it's been 9 years," I said quietly. 9 years of your ridiculous behavior, and I never once thought about leaving. I always told myself you were just childish, that you'd grow up eventually. But today, you've humiliated me completely. All my work for this family, for the company, wasted." I slipped off my wedding ring and placed it in her palm. "Mary, I want a divorce." Hearing this, Mary burst into laughter. "So that's your game? I told you it was just a product launch. It shouldn't upset you this much." Her eyes narrowed. "You're trying to scare me into behaving, aren't you? This privileged heiress could be astonishingly clueless sometimes. George, you'll always be my family's son-in-law. That's your place," she said impatiently, leaning in close to my ear. "You can throw a little tantrum, but don't push it too far. It stops being cute. Jack isn't a threat to your position." She tried to slide the ring back onto my finger. I took the ring, dangled it in front of her face, then deliberately opened my fingers. It hit the floor with a sharp ping. "I'm not playing games anymore, Mary. I want a divorce." We parted that day on terrible terms. Mary refused to sign the papers. I packed my things and moved out of our villa, leaving that chapter behind me. When I showed up at the office the next day, something felt off. Coworkers passed by with sideways glances, starting to speak before thinking better of it. When I reached my office door, I found my belongings scattered across the floor. "What's going on?" I demanded. Jack emerged from my office with a smirk. He glanced at my things on the floor. "George, Mary says you're fired." I stood frozen. "On what grounds?" Leaning against the doorframe, Jack replied, "For ruining the product launch, Brother George." His words hit me like electricity. "That wasn't my fault," I shot back. Jack seemed to relish my reaction. He walked to the desk and flipped over the nameplate. It now read, "General Manager Jack." "Mary insisted I take your position," he said with false sympathy. "Sorry about that, Brother George." His mocking smile said everything as he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You have no place anymore. Not in the company, not in Mary's heart." Jack's words hung in the air as I looked around at my colleagues. Their faces showed discomfort, but no one dared speak up. Mary appeared then, walking confidently toward us. I stared at her, feeling hollow inside. "Mary, what's the meaning of this?" "I'm doing this for your own good," she said casually. "You made a serious mistake. Go home and think about what you've done. Jack will handle your responsibilities for now." Her casual tone struck me. He's just an intern. What gives him the right to take my position? Mary folded her arms across her chest. "George, don't underestimate people. And don't forget, you wouldn't be where you are today without being my husband." The truth hit me then. Mary wasn't just punishing me. She was forcing me to surrender, to acknowledge that without her, I was nothing. She looked me up and down with cold eyes. "As long as you admit you were wrong, everything can go back to normal. I know how much this position means to you. Why else would you work so hard?" I stared at her, realizing how she saw me, just a power-hungry climber. The reality was so different. When Mary's mother first brought me into the company, it was to help protect Mary's interests. After our wedding, Mary spent her days shopping and buying expensive things, completely ignoring the business. I had no choice but to carry the company alone. When cash flow dried up, I was the one standing at clients' doors, begging them to continue working with us. I networked endlessly, seeking new investments. Only I knew how brutal those times were. The memories brought tears to my eyes. I stepped back. "Mary, I must have been blind to marry you." Her expression hardened. "Marrying me was the greatest blessing of your life. Without me, you'd have nothing." Jack leaned in beside her, smirking. "George, who do you think you are? Everything you have is because of Mary." I stood frozen, looking at the pair before me. After a long moment, I smiled. "Mary, don't forget to sign the divorce papers." After walking out, my phone exploded with calls, all from key staff members I'd personally promoted over the years. Each one wanted to speak up for me. I switched off my phone and drifted through the streets with no destination in mind. Suddenly, terrified screams erupted from the crowd around me. Before I could make sense of what was happening, something slammed into me with tremendous force, throwing me to the ground. Pain shot through my entire body in waves. I felt warm liquid, my own blood, trickling from my forehead and several other places. Then darkness swallowed everything. When I came to, I was in a hospital. The doctor asked me to contact family. Fighting through the pain that made my voice shake, I called Mary. "Mary, I've been in a car accident. I'm at the hospital. The doctors say they need a family member to come. Can you come?" Mary listened, then scoffed. "George, if you're sorry, just apologize properly. Don't try these pathetic stunts." I hung up without another word and told the doctor I was an orphan with no family. I'd have to sign my own consent forms for anesthesia. As I lay there afterward, tears slipped silently from the corners of my eyes. This marriage I'd fought so hard to save was truly over. Before slipping into unconsciousness, I texted my assistant. "The materials are ready. Proceed as planned." I felt like I slept forever, a deep, exhausting darkness. When I finally opened my eyes again, night had fallen. Mary was beside my bed, sleeping fitfully. The moment I stirred, her eyes snapped open. "George, are you hurting anywhere else?" she asked, grabbing my hand tightly. The IV needle in my hand made it impossible to pull away immediately. All I felt was a coldness spreading through my heart. "Mary, why are you here?" I asked flatly. "I'm your wife," she rushed to answer. "Of course I should take care of you. I'm sorry. I didn't believe you were really hurt." I laughed bitterly inside. "You've lost my trust completely. What makes you think I'd ever take you back as my wife?" Mary's eyes widened as she saw my expression. Whatever she planned to say died in her throat. The color slowly drained from her face. "George, don't talk like that. Everything will be fine. We'll be fine too." I slowly pulled my hand from hers, closing my eyes from exhaustion. "Mary, let's get divorced. Please, just let me go." Mary's forehead creased with concern. Mary stared at me, unable to grasp why I was so determined to end our marriage. Suddenly she stood up, her voice dripping with contempt. "Enough with the drama," she snapped. "You're an orphan, remember? Where will you go after leaving me? The accident was just that, an accident. It doesn't change our relationship." I realized then that Mary had always spoken to me this way, always from a position of superiority. In her mind, we were never equals. I turned my head away, pressed the nurse call button, and spoke quietly. "The moment you started looking down on me was the moment there was no going back for us. And you're wrong about something else. I may be an orphan, but I've never felt less because of it. I'm not some naive romantic who doesn't understand the real world." I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I've worked hard, navigated the business world successfully. My skills and experience stand on their own merit, equal to anyone else's." Mary's self-important lecturing meant nothing to me now. She opened her mouth to continue, but I cut her off with a wave of my hand. "If you don't want to push me over the edge, just leave. Let me have some peace." Mary closed her mouth abruptly. After a few moments, I heard the door open and close as she left. I opened my eyes again, sat up, and gazed out the window. The moonlight cast a tranquil glow, beautiful in its silence. My phone vibrated with a message from my assistant. "Everything is ready, Brother George." The next day, a trending topic exploded online. News about Mary, company president, caught in multiple affairs. The article meticulously outlined a timeline, exposing dates, details, and various men she'd been with. It concluded with an assortment of intimate photographs. Mary and I had been together for 14 years, from dating through marriage, yet she'd been unfaithful for 9 of those years. The article also highlighted my sacrifices, giving up opportunities abroad to stay with her, working tirelessly to save her family's company. The story ignited fierce public debate, with overwhelming criticism directed at Mary. Many commenters declared they would boycott all products from her company. Meanwhile, sympathetic strangers urged me to divorce her immediately and distance myself from such a disreputable woman. The public outrage simmered for 3 days before Mary appeared at my hospital room again. She looked terrible. Hollow eyes, disheveled hair. The last few days had clearly taken their toll. The hospital room felt colder than usual that day. Mary stood there, looking at me with those sad eyes. "George, how did we get here?" she whispered. I couldn't meet her gaze. "If you're not here about the divorce papers, you should leave." Mary didn't move. She just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at me. After a while, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's fair. You have every right to be mad," she said. "But George, the reason I want a divorce, it's because I love you." She leaned forward, putting her forehead against my hand. I could feel her tears on my skin. "George, please," her voice broke. "Let's forget about the divorce. We'll do whatever you want. Just don't leave me." I pulled my hand away and wiped it on the blanket like her touch had left something behind. "What, you want me to go online and clean up your mess? Make your president look good again?" I could see the flash of anger in her eyes, but she pushed it down. "I just think this is too extreme," she said. "We've been together for so long. Can't you forgive me just this once?" I shook my head, amazed at how some people just can't own up to what they've done. "Are you willing to end things with Jack?" I asked point blank. Mary wiped her face. "It's just a passing thing with him," she said lightly. "You know that." She paused before continuing. "Jack reminds me of how you used to be, when you needed me for everything. But George, I never wanted to leave you." I ignored her first comment but believed the second part. Of course she never wanted to leave me. As her family's son-in-law, I was perfect, obedient, talented, useful. But that meant nothing to me now. I had never married her for love anyway. "Let's stop dragging this out," I told her with an empty expression. "Sign the papers. A clean break is best for both of us." 14 years together and you can't remember any of it?" Mary's voice was rough with emotion. "George, don't forget, without my family, without being my husband, you're nothing." Even now, she was saying the same old things. I was so tired of hearing it. I leaned closer to her and spoke softly. "Mary, you know what I'm capable of. Do you honestly think I owe my success to your family?" Mary froze. I think she was remembering my past, how I'd always been at the top of my class, how I'd always excelled. Sure, the funding for my business came from different sources at first, but in just 2 years, I had turned one small supermarket into a chain that owned 2/3 of the shops in the university town. People look at me and see an orphan who got lucky. They think I only made it into Mary's world because I'm good-looking. But that's not how I see myself. I never felt unloved. My parents filled my childhood with warmth before they passed away. My friends always saw something special in me, and I've always had faith in myself. When I fell for Mary, I gave her everything. But I always knew that if love ended, I'd be fine on my own. That's just who I am. I live life on my terms. After I asked for divorce, Mary refused to accept it. She started acting like we were dating again, calling me every day, texting updates about her life. Some nights, she'd call from strange numbers, telling me how sorry she was and talking about the good times we had. One night after hanging up on her, Jack called me. "George," he said with a hint of smugness, "she dumped me." Says she wants to win you back. Spends all day at work staring at your pictures like she's obsessed. If I'd known it would end like this, I wouldn't have bothered. I just laughed quietly. It wasn't obsession, it was calculation. Good-looking guys are everywhere. She only wants me because I'm smart and driven, but I know when to draw the line. She might not like how independent I am, might be jealous of what I can do, but she needs my help with her career. I gave her emotional support when she needed it. I made her feel important while helping her succeed. I provided both feelings and security. Deep down, she knows she'll never find anyone else who can give her everything I did. She just forgot that perfect partners don't exist. Relationships take work and commitment. She wanted the perfect lover, so I played that part. George, did you ever really love her? Jack asked quietly. Did I love her? Of course I did. I loved her when she ran through the heat to buy my favorite cake. When others made fun of me for being an orphan, she stood up for me, not caring what she looked like, demanding they apologize. When she was so nervous asking me out that she had to try 3 times to get the words right. I did love Mary once, with my whole heart. But everything changed the day I got accepted to study abroad. I overheard her talking with her mother, and what I heard shattered me. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a challenge, a conquest. Mary broke down everything about me like I was a specimen, my looks, my personality, my grades. She called me a dandelion, tough enough to grow anywhere. She wanted to see what would happen if she clipped my wings. Would I fall? Would I beg for her love? "Mom," she had said with excitement in her voice, "I want to trap him like a pet to play with." I stood outside under the stars for hours that night. My hands went numb from the cold, but I barely noticed. By morning, I'd made my decision. Instead of waiting for them to take away my chance to study abroad, I'd give it up myself. I used her family's connections to make it happen. I also destroyed my own shop. If Mary wanted to break me, I'd break myself first. But I'd use her resources to build myself back up. I refused to lose this game. Jack laughed softly on the phone. "It's not over yet, is it, George? You want much more than this, don't you?" I nodded to myself. "You know me well." Jack let out a sigh. "This isn't the end. It can't be." My plan never changed. Take over the family business completely and rebrand it with my name. That's why I gave up my future all those years ago. The situation couldn't be more perfect. Mary's father died young. Her mother's health has been failing for years, and Mary herself has no business sense at all. All I needed was time, and I would own everything. After we married, I became exactly who Mary wanted me to be. When her mother's health started getting worse, I shifted my focus to the company. As for Mary, I carefully crafted Jack into her ideal type and sent him her way 9 years into our marriage. By now, I've personally built the company's core team. I've poured everything into this business. I know exactly where things stand. When I got better and left the hospital, I went back to the house Mary and I shared. She was sprawled on the couch, arm thrown over her eyes, looking completely defeated. "George, you planned all this, didn't you?" She uncovered her eyes and looked at me. I could see the silent plea in them. I knew things had been falling apart for her. While I was in the hospital, the team I'd carefully built began quitting one by one. Once they left, the company started crumbling like a building with its foundation removed. The first big problem was financial. Mary had hired her lover's relatives despite my objections. "They're highly qualified," she'd insisted, pushing me to train them. Sure, they worked efficiently, but they also loved skimming a little off the top. Over time, those small thefts added up to a major problem. But this was exactly what I'd wanted. Just as I predicted, the finance department imploded. Then, with Jack's help, more problems surfaced throughout the company. Our industry reputation crashed, and board members started pulling their investments. Mary had no idea how to save the business. I'd deliberately kept her dependent and unprepared over the years, and now she was paying the price. People who play with others' feelings eventually face consequences. When Mary reached for my hand, I stepped back. I placed 2 documents on the table in front of her, divorce papers and a share purchase agreement. "Mary, please sign," I said quietly. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. "George, are you really this cold? I know I was wrong. I won't contact those men again." When I didn't respond, she grew frantic. "I just made one mistake. Do you really hate me that much?" she shouted, her voice rough like an animal in pain. Do I hate Mary? Maybe I did once. I had happily given her my heart, believing I'd get genuine love in return. Instead, I got a knife in my chest. I pushed my glasses up and said, "Mary, I've never been someone who repays kindness with resentment. When you tried to destroy my shop to keep me under your control, didn't that seem cruel to you?" I asked calmly. Mary jumped to her feet. "I didn't do that. I swear I didn't." I laughed softly. "I know, because I destroyed it myself before you could. I beat you to it." Mary's lips started shaking. "So you heard me talking that day, but I only did it because I love you. Then I'll take your company. That seems fair, doesn't it?" I paused, smiled, and shook my head. "You see? You're still so selfish and foolish. You never considered what would happen to me if I became what you wanted. Just a puppet trying to please you. Once you got bored, you'd throw me away. By then, I'd have no skills, no expertise. My life would be ruined. How could I possibly forgive that, Mary?" Mary stared at me, truly hopeless for the first time. "George," she shook her head desperately but couldn't say anything more. "Stop fighting this, Mary. You can't win against me. I still have some feelings left for what we once had. Sign the papers now. Don't push me. You can't afford to." Mary's face changed instantly. "George, do we really have to end things this way?" I stood up suddenly, my chair scraping against the floor. "What did you expect? That after everything we could just go back to normal? Yes, we have 14 years of history, but from day one you were lying to me. Not to mention your affairs. Looking at you now makes me sick. I can barely stand the sight of you. Don't push me anymore, Mary." Mary closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were strangely calm. "Okay," she whispered. Our divorce went through without much argument. She kept the house. I got the company and car. We split our savings down the middle. On the day I left, Mary looked exhausted. "If I hadn't cheated, would you still have divorced me?" she asked. I gave her a gentle smile. What's the point of asking questions like that now? Mary was quiet for a long time. Finally, she looked up at me. "George, I really do love you." I laughed and turned to leave. "I love you only sounds beautiful when you're in love. Otherwise, those words mean nothing." The day the company officially changed hands, I sent someone to tell Mary's mother. When the company officially changed hands. She deserved to hear about this victory. But the news hit her hard. She collapsed into a coma and hasn't woken up since. When I found out, I went straight to the hospital and paid all her medical bills. Standing in the doorway of her room, I looked at her frail body in the hospital bed. Suddenly, I remembered our first meeting years ago. Back then, she stood tall and confident, looking down at me with disapproval. "George, you should consider it an honor that our Mary has chosen you," she had said, her voice filled with judgment. "As her mother, I respect her wishes and will permit you to become part of this family." She slid some papers across the table. "Don't be hasty to refuse. Review these first. I understand your mother was a respected teacher when she was alive. You wouldn't want her good reputation damaged now, would you?" My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were fabricated stories about my mother. inappropriate relationships with students, accepting favors, mistreating children. Any single one could destroy everything my mother had worked for. "These are all false," I whispered. "People believe what they see," she replied dismissively. "They don't concern themselves with truth. I'm certain a devoted son like you understands what's at stake." I yielded and signed her agreement to help protect Mary's company. She only consented to our marriage because she'd investigated me. She knew about my business skills and thought being an orphan made me easier to influence. She was mistaken. I've never been someone others can manipulate. Even the gentlest creature will defend itself when threatened, and I'm far from helpless. As I turned to leave the hospital, a strained voice called out behind me, "Are you satisfied now?" Mary stood there, holding some medical report. She'd lost so much weight that her collarbones were prominently visible. "I used to believe I was exceptional," she said quietly, "that I came from a respectable family and had much to offer. I thought you were fortunate to have me, that you should be appreciative of my attention." She looked down at the floor. "But now I see the reality. Without my parents protecting me, I'm nothing. The company's gone. My mother's dying. And you've departed too." "I've lost everything," Mary said, her voice breaking. The autumn wind blew cold around us. I remained silent. There was nothing left to say between us. I turned to leave, but Mary called after me. "George, please stay," she implored, her body trembling and eyes red with tears. "Can't we set aside the past and begin anew?" I paused without turning around. "From the moment you deceived me and looked down on me, we had no future. Only a conclusion with no possibility of return." My words dissolved whatever hope she had left. Mary sank to the ground, shaking, clutching at her hair until it tangled between her fingers. Her sobs came in broken gasps. I didn't look back. I just walked away. The sunset painted the sky as I left the hospital. 14 years of memories stayed behind me, like shadows that couldn't follow where I was going. The path ahead stretched toward a new beginning, one that belonged only to me.